Bringing up children is not easy, and it's not always easy to be brought up by our parents either. In this podcast, we'll share some things our parents used to say that made sense at the time, but seem strange when we look back at them many years later. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. So, Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing very well, too. I'm very happy to be here podcasting with you as always.
I do have some news before we get into this week's lesson, and that is my next conversation course is starting at the beginning of October. And I know there were some people that could not study over the summer because of holidays and family commitments. So if you are interested in improving your English conversation with me and a small group of lovely students, you can get more details at englishmasterclass.net. So sign up for the email and I will be in touch with dates and prices very, very soon. That's englishmasterclass.net, and there is a link in the show notes to this episode. What's first, Reza?
First of all, we've got a voice message from Loli from Spain.
Hi, Craig. I am Loli from Spain. I would like to tell you a completely true story that happened to me some times ago. One night, I was at home alone because my husband worked at night. I went to bed late. The house was extremely quiet and I was exhausted. Suddenly, I felt as if the sheets were getting up, as if someone was lying down next to me. I quickly turned off the light. I was scared, but no one was there. I turned off the light again, but it happened and again. So I left the light on all night and spent the whole night sitting on my bed praying. Even today, when I look back on this night, I wonder if I dreamt it or it's what I want to believe.
Thank you, Loli, for sending your message. Now, Loli sent us that message because fairly recently we've been getting messages from people telling us true stories. And if you want to go back 2 or 3 episodes, you'll hear more true stories from listeners. Reza, what did you think of Loli's? It was quite scary, wasn't it? Quite frightening.
I can understand why you were so frightened, Loli. I would have been as well in your position because the sheets rose up not just once, but several times. Wow, that would really frighten me.
Has that ever happened to you where you've had a kind of a supernatural experience, something you can't explain?
Not that I remember, although I did have an experience which frightened me once. But I'll tell it in another episode. I thought it was supernatural, but it had a perfectly logical explanation. But we'll save that for another day.
That's what we call a tease. That's to get you listening to future episodes. 1 or 2 points about your message, Loli, which was clear. We understood everything you said, but we can improve it just a little. You're confusing the 2 words history and story. The thing you told us was a story. I think it was a true story. When we speak about history, what's history? History. History is a subject you study at school or at university. The history of Spain, you go back hundreds and hundreds of years. The history of humankind. So there is a difference in English between history and a story, which is what you told us. Anything else, Reza?
Yes, a couple of other things. I already mentioned about the sheets rising up. You said, I think, that the sheet, it got up. I think you said
People get up,
people
don't
get
they?
up in
Yeah.
the morning, hopefully, or whenever they rise, or whenever they rise out of bed. Yeah, so you can rise out of bed, but it's far more typical to say people simply get up. So the sheets, they rise up. But your story was in the past, so we need the past. And guess what? It's irregular. The sheets rose up.
Also, Lolly, be careful of the pronunciation of scared. Scared. If you are scared, then you are very frightened. So scared is the correct pronunciation. And also, I think you said some times ago with an S. There's no S on time. So some time ago. Sometime in the past is some time ago. This happened to me. But you did use some very good phrasal verbs. Reza, did you notice any of the phrasal verbs that Lolly used in her story?
Yes, I did. And not only that, but generally you use the correct tense, present and past, correctly. And you use the phrasal verb to lie down. So to lie down is to put your body horizontally. That's a good phrasal verb, Lolly.
And you used to turn on the light, turn on, turn off. We turn on the light, we turn off the light. And to look back is another phrasal verb you used very well, to look back. And I liked at the end of the story when you said, I wonder if I dreamt it or it really happened. I wonder, I'm not sure. Did I dream it? I wonder if I dreamt it or did it really happen?
That was a really good story, Lolly. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thanks very much. Now, this week we're going to talk about some things that we were told as children by our mum and dad. So things our mum and dad used to say to us, things that stick in our minds, that stay in our minds as we grow up and become older. Let's start off with the first one. Reza, what sticks in your mind from when you were a child?
Well, a classic one, which mums and dads love to say, is whenever their child doesn't want to do something and the parent insists, but the child doesn't see a logical reason why they should do this thing, your mum and dad simply says, because I said so. That's a classic. Why? Why do you have to do this? Why do you have to go to bed? Why do you have to tidy up your room? Why do you have to be back at 11 o'clock? Why do you... Because I said so.
Which is really annoying when you're a child, isn't it? Because you want an explanation. You want to know why you can't do something, and that's really not an explanation. Another thing I remember is back in my day, and here my parents used to stress the my, because usually that's a word that's not stressed very much. You say, well, here's, I'm going to pick up my bag. You wouldn't stress that, my. But in this expression, my parents did. Back in my day, we never used to use our phones so much. Back in my day, we didn't have PlayStations or Xboxes. We used to play in the street with our friends. We say that now as well, don't we, Reza? We say back in my day. People didn't behave that way.
Yes, I'm afraid Craig and I have got to the age where we've started to say it. Not a good sign.
Yeah, they wouldn't do that back in my day.
And whenever it's used, it's always the implication that you know what's going to come after it. Your mom and dad's going to talk about how it was better in their day or it was harder.
Yes.
It's always one of those two
More
things.
difficult.
Oh, well, back in my day, we had tremendous fun. You guys with your smartphones, you don't know how to have fun. Better. Or back in my day, oh, you had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and work down a coal mine for 4 hours. Life was hard. Those are the two things, aren't they? It was better, but it was harder.
Yeah, I used to get up at 3:30, half an hour before I went to bed. Now, do you remember the ping pong between mum and dad if you wanted to do something? I call it ping pong or tennis because you'd go to your mum and you'd say, hey, mum, can I go to a party on Friday? And she'd say, well, ask your father. So you'd go to your dad, you'd say, well, Dad, can I go to this? Ask your mother. And you'd go backwards and forwards because neither of them wanted to make a decision.
Yeah, if you think about it, it was completely trying to avoid responsibility, to not be the one who could later be blamed if anything went wrong. So you ask him or ask her.
Yeah, to get an answer was impossible. Yeah. The next one we have is, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. You're asking something for permission to do something, and your mum or your dad says, look, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Put your clothes away. Tidy your room.
The next one was a particular favorite of my mum. She used to say, whenever I asked her to do something which I thought was fairly easy and no trouble for her, she'd say, what did your last slave die of?
Your last what?
What did your last slave die of? Slave, yeah. A person who has no liberty, yeah. Someone who has no freedom, someone who has to work for nothing. But it might have been something like, hey, Mum, can you pour me a glass of water? Because she happened to be beside the water. What did your last slave die of? I'd hear.
So it wasn't so much that she felt like a slave. It was more, no, just do it yourself. Don't ask me to do things for you. Can you make me a sandwich, Mum? What did your last slave die of? Can you turn on the TV? What did your last slave die of? By the way, if you want to see these expressions written, you can go to the website inglespodcast.com/432 for this episode 432.
Now, Craig, if you were playing around in a very, let's say, boisterous way,
which I used to do at home. I used to play football with a tennis ball in the lounge. Did you do that?
That type of thing, exactly. So things can go wrong. If you do fool about with a tennis ball in a lounge, you could break things, you could hurt yourself. So that's when you would get the classic comment, it'll end in tears. It'll end in tears. You're doing something which is not going to end well. There's going to be an accident. Somebody's going to get hurt. You're going to have an argument. You're going to fall out. Something bad's going to happen. It'll end in tears.
So tears, the water that comes from your eyes when you cry, and it will end is what will happen finally if you continue doing this dangerous activity. Another thing I used to do was play football by myself with cushions. We had cushions on the sofa. So I used to kick these cushions around, and occasionally I would break the lamp shade, for example, or maybe a vase that fell over and broke, and sometimes it did end in tears.
And whenever you broke the lamp and you were told it'll end in tears, but you didn't listen, I bet you often heard then, you just wait until your dad gets home. He'll give you what for breaking that lamp. You just wait till your dad gets home.
Yeah, that's a strange expression, isn't it? He'll give you what for. When your dad gets home, he'll give you what for. What does that mean?
Possibly hit you a couple of times around the back of the head, or give you a real telling off. To tell someone off is to reprimand them, or maybe a bit of both.
Yeah. And that was a threat that my mum often used with me when I was misbehaving or behaving badly. Wait until your dad gets home. He'll give you a good hiding. To hide, H-I-D-E. Now, the meaning from my mum with this was he will hit you. He'll give you a good hiding. He will hit you. He will beat you. So the big threat was, I'm going to tell your dad when he gets home from work. Did your parents ever hit you?
Yes, they did. And my mum used to say this, you just wait till your dad gets home. But she didn't know that I was more frightened of her. She was the one who tended to hit more readily. That means she was more prepared to do it than my dad.
It was my dad who really hit me. My mum, I don't think, hit me very often. But my dad did have a bad temper, and there were times when he hit me quite hard, actually, I remember. So that threat of you just wait until your dad gets home was quite ominous. It was quite a serious threat. It made me a bit scared.
Talking about other ominous threats, we did get warned, if we didn't heed the warnings, if we didn't pay attention, that's when we got hit. But there were warnings, things like, don't make me tell you again, or don't make me go up there. So this don't make me is like a warning to say, you're being persistently irritating. You better stop. Yeah, so it's like a warning. It's like your last warning. Don't make me tell you again to shut up, for example. Don't make me go up there to your bedroom, for example. Or don't make me pull this car over. if your mom or dad is driving and you irritate them, they might have to actually stop the car. So to pull over the car is to slow down, go to the side and stop. So if you force them to do that from your persistent irritation, then you're going to pay for that.
And that's an interesting verb form with make, to make someone do something. So it's with the infinitive without to. So not make someone to do something, but make someone do something. For example, my parents made me tidy up my room. My parents made me wash the dishes after dinner. So to make someone do something.
Now, Craig, in theory, it should be good that your child smiles. People smile when they're happy. You would think that parents in general want to see their children smile. Well, apparently not, because they have a few expressions up their sleeves. That means waiting for certain situations, such as, "Oh, you'll be smiling on the other side of your face in a minute."
Yeah, if you're laughing at the wrong time, perhaps, or annoying your parents because something really isn't funny, but you think it is, like your mother's just dropped a plate on the floor and it's broken, and you start smiling, well, you'll be smiling on the other side of your face when I hit you, for example.
Or another one, "Wipe that smile off your face." So imagine as if you were a cartoon drawing and you could wipe off, you could just take a cloth and rub out the ink. Wipe that smile off your face.
If I was too noisy, if I spoke too much at the dinner table, or maybe there were guests in the house and I was being too noisy or too much of a child, then my parents would say, children should be seen and not heard. Did you hear that when you were younger?
Yeah. When I was very young, yeah. That's more for really young kids, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another classic is simply 4 words: my house, my rules. In other words, you can disagree all you like with your parents, but who owns the house? Who pays the mortgage? Or who bought the house? Them. So bad luck if you don't like it. My house, my rules.
Or a similar expression is do as I say, not as I do, which is quite hypocritical, isn't it? So behave the way I tell you to, not the way I behave myself. Do as I say, not as I do.
One of my favorite expressions in English, to gloat. Gloat. To gloat is to take pleasure in somebody else mucking things up. Gloat is this, oh, you know it all, don't you? Or it can be in the past. If you've already made the mistake, it could be in the past simple. Oh, you knew it all, didn't you?
And if you are a know-it-all, in Spanish that's sabe todo, someone who knows or thinks they know everything about everything. And the pronunciation's interesting because know it all connects in connected speech. So you hear know-it-all, know-it-all. Oh, you think you're a know-it-all, do you?
Craig, who's she?
The cat's mother. That's when you don't use mum or dad and you say, well, she told me I can't go and play. So who's she? They like to hear mum or dad. They don't like to hear the pronouns she or he. Yeah.
And you, to be honest, you probably said she or he when you were angry rather than say mum. When you were angry with your mum, you probably said to your dad, well, she said blah, blah, blah.
She never lets me do anything. And then you hear from the kitchen, who's she? The cat's mother?
And you might even hear, she? To think you'd speak to your own mother like that. Or, for the dad, to think you'd speak to your own father like that. With a lack of respect, implying that you haven't addressed them with the correct respect.
Or similarly, who do you think you're talking to with that kind of intonation? Just who do you think you're talking to?
Another one in a similar kind of way, it's used whenever your mum and dad doesn't like the way you're talking. Craig spoke of intonation, and they might say to you, don't use that tone with me. In other words, they don't like the tone, the intonation of your voice, the way you're inflecting your voice implies that you're angry with them or you're telling them off, and they're not going to be told off by you. So don't use that tone with me.
And you can also use a similar expression to an adult, from one adult to another adult. If you are, let's say, in a restaurant and the waiter is very rude, you could say, I don't like your tone. Or at work, maybe your boss is speaking to you in a disrespectful way. You could say, I really don't like your tone. You're expressing your dissatisfaction, your displeasure, your unhappiness with the way you're being spoken to. I really don't like your tone.
And if it's really extreme, if it's very, very extreme, you could use a more extreme phrase. And you could say, how dare you speak to me like that? That's when you're really annoyed.
How dare you? How dare you? Now, there were several activities that I was told as a young man could make me blind.
But we can't talk about all of them, can we?
We can't talk about all of them, but one thing was sitting too close to the telly, and telly is a colloquial way to say TV in British English. So you could hear, don't sit so close to the telly, you'll get square eyes, or you'll go blind.
As Craig said, there are other activities, but we're not going to talk about them. But let me just point out, you might know that Craig is very short-sighted.
Yes, because I watched too much TV, Reza.
When you were younger, yes.
That's the only reason.
Actually, I do wear glasses myself, so I don't want to be a hypocrite, do I? Okay, let's move on swiftly.
I think we should.
But sticking to eyes, because parents are fascinated with eyes, another thing you'd often hear is, you'll take someone's eye out with that. Whenever they're a bit worried, it's one of Craig's games, for example, he's whacking the tennis ball around the house. You'll take someone's eye out with that. You know,
yeah, or maybe you're using an umbrella as a sword. And playing games with an umbrella. I actually nearly did take somebody's eye out when I was young. Do you remember I recently went to Scotland to stay with my friend who I've known since we were 6 or 7 years old? We were playing in my garden, which was very, very long. And do you remember those bamboo sticks that we used to have in England to put in the earth to grow vegetables sometimes, or plants that go up the stick? Well, I picked up one from the ground and I threw it like a javelin, like a spear, towards the end of the garden. And I knew my friend Graham was around that area, but I had no idea where he was. And it actually hit him just above his eye and cut his head really, really badly. And if it had hit him half an inch lower, I would have taken his eye out.
Wow, so parents are right to be alarmed. It can happen.
Yep.
It really can.
Absolutely.
Craig discovered he nearly put someone's eye out.
Sometimes you may notice that young people don't close doors because they just don't think to close doors. And we used to hear a lot, shut that door. Were you brought up in a barn? A barn, B-A-R-N, is a big building you'd often find on a farm to store hay or food for the animals. So obviously barns often don't have doors. If you were brought up or raised in a barn, you would have no door to close. Or you may hear, were you brought up on a bus? Because years ago, buses did not have doors. If you've ever seen an old London bus, the red buses, the very old ones had no door at the back. You just jumped on the bus. So were you brought up on a bus could mean, why don't you shut the door? You didn't shut the door. Were you brought up in a barn?
Now, the next phrase might seem complicated, but it has a logical explanation. If you, as a child, heard, if someone asked you to put your head in a gas oven, would you? You might think, why on earth would someone say that? Well, the situation there is probably that you want to do something and you keep bothering, you keep annoying your parents about it. You want to do something because all your friends are doing it. Everybody's doing it. It's all the rage. It's in fashion. So you want to get that certain pair of trousers, or you need those certain pair of trainers because everybody else has them. And your mom might say, if someone asked you to put your head in a gas oven, would you? In other words, you don't have to do what everybody else is doing.
Or a similar expression, if someone asked you to jump off a cliff, would you? Would you jump? So don't always do what your friends do just because you want to be like them. Think for yourself. Reza, if your parents said to you, serves you right, or it serves you right, would they be serving you food, or would you be in a restaurant? What would that mean?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid, yet again, they would be reprimanding me for having done something silly. So when you've done something which they consider silly, and you tell them, looking for a bit of sympathy, like, oh, Mom, I was playing with this knife, and look, I've cut my finger. Well, serves you right.
You deserve it.
If you're going to play with a knife, these things will happen. So that's when you get serves you right.
Yep, serves you right. You deserve it. We mentioned earlier the expression, it'll end in tears. But if you're doing something maybe a little bit dangerous, like bouncing or jumping on the sofa or the bed, or balancing on top of a chair, something that might be dangerous, your parents could say, don't come crying to me, which means if it ends badly, if there's an accident, don't come to me expecting comfort and sympathy. Don't come crying to me.
And if things do end badly, really badly, you might hear, oh, you've really done it this time. Like, you've mucked up a lot of things in your life, but this is a big one. This is a big one. You've really done it this time.
And if your parents are angry, they could say, listen to me, young man, or listen to me, young lady. So they take a formal tone or a formal attitude with you. You listen to me, young man. I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times.
I wonder if that's a universal thing. I bet it is, because I know in Spanish it's something similar, isn't it? They say, no sé qué tal, señorito or señorita.
Yeah.
I bet that's a universal thing. This fake, this false formality, when actually they're going to tell you off and they want you to feel humiliated.
And to tell you off is to tell you that you've done bad things, you've misbehaved, that you haven't behaved correctly. To tell someone off. That phrasal verb, to tell off.
And if you've really disappointed them repeatedly, your parents might say, you'll be the death of me. Which isn't a very nice thing to say if you think about it.
You'll kill me.
You'll kill me. You'll be the death of me. That means I'm going to die because of you. I'm going to have a heart attack or a terrible accident, and it'll be your fault, young man or young lady. You'll be the death of me.
And if you really upset your parents, they might come to you with the expression, after all I've done for you, after everything I've done for you, this is the thanks I get. This is the thanks I get after everything I've done for you, which is supposed to make you feel guilty, but I never felt guilty.
Yes, but parents love a good guilt trip if they can. A guilt trip isn't an actual holiday to anywhere physical. It's a psychological journey where they try to make you have all sorts of terrible thoughts in your mind about what an awful person you are. You should feel terrible because they've been so nice to you. So they're guilt tripping you.
So Reza, when you were punished as a child and your parents said to you, you'll thank me one day, did you ever go back and thank them for something they punished you for?
Not really, to be honest. Nothing that I can think of. You know, particularly if I got, a whack round the back of the ear.
What's a whack?
A whack. So being hit, but not very violently, but kind of the way you might hit, whether you should or not, I don't know, but you might hit your son or daughter. Well, in the 1970s, when I was growing up, perhaps now, no, but it was pretty common there, kind of around the back of the head, a whack, which is spelled W-H-A-C-K. So they might give you the whack and you go, hey, what'd you do that for? You'll thank me someday, young man. Trying to teach you a lesson.
And sometimes I think this is a generational thing, but when you see younger people, the younger generation behaving a certain way that you disapprove of, that you think is not good, you might think or say, what's the world coming to? What is the world coming to when you see people behaving like that. What do you think, Reza? Do you think young kids have it too easy these days? Do you think they're misbehaving more than they did in the past? Are parents too soft on kids?
It depends where. Possibly in the West, in the more developed, the richer countries, yeah, because there's so many facilities and things which make our life easy, perhaps. But I imagine things haven't changed much in poorer countries, in countries with real poverty. I imagine children's lives are as hard, if not harder, than they've always been. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree. And in privileged countries, I think there is a feeling, maybe with the older generation, that the younger generation are the entitled generation. They feel this entitlement that they deserve certain things in life. They deserve to have comforts. They deserve to have a job. They deserve to have these things. I think there's that expectation that didn't exist when we were younger.
Yes, because our parents wanted us to have the best possible. And they wanted us to have things that they didn't have, which is natural. The only downside to that is then you will hear, well, back in my day. So they're not going to let you forget it, eh?
Yeah.
In my day. Now, Craig, how would you feel if you were 15 years old again, or 12 years old, or something like that, and your mum said to you, Craig Wheeland, listen to me. So she starts off with your full name. Oh dear, what's going to happen?
She never did that. I don't think she ever called me by my full name. Your mum did she?
Occasionally, yeah. And I've seen other mums and dads do it with their kids. And I know that you're in trouble. That much I know. If you get your full name, your first name and surname from your mum or dad, you're in trouble. You can be sure of that, right?
Well, it's similar to listen to me, young man, young lady. That formality with using your surname means you're in trouble and they are taking a formal approach to your punishment, perhaps. Let's finish with your mum's favourite. I think your mum had a favourite expression, did she?
Yeah. So just let me clarify that all the expressions we've used so far are used all over the English-speaking world. Some more, some less in some countries, but they're common phrases, they're common expressions. However, my mum had her own idiosyncratic favorite. So it's not a common phrase, but she made it up and she liked it. And it was this: I'll not miss and hit the wall.
That was said in a Belfast accent.
Yeah. And you might think, what on earth is she talking about? I'll not miss. So miss means you don't get the target. I'll not miss and hit the wall. Well, she would say that when she was about to hurl, H-U-R-L, to throw quickly a slipper, yeah, what you put on your feet at home, so you can slip it off very quickly, very handy to hurl it at people. When she was going to hurl it at me or one of my brothers or sisters because she was angry. So you got the warning. You got the warning. I'll not miss and hit the wall. Like any minute, I'm going to throw this at you. And you know what? She wasn't joking. She was an exceptionally good aim. She tended to hit her target. So it was a bit like being, in the sights of a Russian sniper in Stalingrad. You really ought to think twice about your next move. She's not going to miss.
She was good with a slipper, was she?
If only she had been a baseball pitcher, the Boston Red Sox would have paid her a fortune. She would have been the best pitcher they ever had.
That's funny. Well, now it's time for you to practice your English. Were you a well-behaved kid, a well-behaved youngster? Were your parents too strict with you? What do you think? What strange things did your parents say to you? And can you translate them into English and tell us? We would love to get your voice messages and play them in a future podcast. Reza, how can people send us voice messages?
You can record your voice and send the audio to us at speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. There's a link in the show notes. Or if you prefer, you could write to us. Craig, how can people find you with an email?
Send emails to me, Craig, C-R-A-I-G, @inglespodcast.com. Or if you want to reach Reza, Belfast Reza, R-E-Z-A, @gmail.com. We also remind you that the Mansion Inglés has an online store. If you're interested in studying with a paid course of English, go to store.mansioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to thank all the people who help us through the Patreon scheme. That's spelled Patreon. If you're interested, have a look at the show notes. There's a link to patreon.com/Inglespodcast. And you'll find the information there about how you can donate money to the podcast. Don't worry, we don't spend your money on Rolls Royces or anything like that. As a thank you for the money, we use the money to get transcriptions done. So as a thank you to people who donate the money, you get to hear all the most recent audio transcripts. The minimum amount you have to pay on Patreon is $1 plus 20 cents for tax, VAT. So $1.20 per month gets you access to all our audio transcripts.
And we don't have time to mention everybody who is supporting us on Patreon, but we will mention the latest people who have joined the program. And many, many thanks to Eugenia Gil and Esteban. Thank you very much to you and to everybody who is supporting us on Patreon. What's next week, Reza?
Next week's episode features the words, had better.
So you had better listen next week. Thank you so much for listening this week. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can join our community. Until next time, it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's goodbye from Craig.
The music in this podcast was by Pitts. The track was called See You Later.